First Corinthians 4:13 says, we have been made as the filth of the world. Let me just read this, and then I'll add some additional thoughts. These words are not an exaggeration. The only reason they may not be true of us who call ourselves ministers of the gospel is not that Paul forgot or misunderstood the exact truth of them, but that we are too cautious and concerned about our own desires to allow ourselves to become the refuse or filth of the world. Fill up in my flesh what is lacking in the afflictions of Christ. Colossians 1:24 is not the result of holiness of sanctification. Sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought here. Fill up in my flesh what is lacking in the afflictions of Christ is not the result of the holiness of sanctification, but the evidence of consecration, being separated to the gospel of God. Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you. If we do think the things that we encounter are strange, it is because we are fearful and cowardly. We pay so close attention to our own interests and desires, we stay out of the mire and say, I won't submit, I won't bow or bend. And you don't have to. You can be saved by the skin of your teeth if you like. You can refuse to let God count you as one who is separated to the gospel. Or you can say, I don't care if I'm treated like the filth of the world, as long as the gospel is proclaimed. A true servant of Jesus Christ is one who is willing to experience martyrdom for the reality of the gospel of God. When a moral person is confronted with contempt, immorality, disloyalty, or dishonesty, he is so repulsed by the offense that he turns away in despair and closes his heart to the offender. But the miracle of the redemptive reality of God is that the worst and vilest offender can never exhaust the depths of his love. Paul did not say that God separated him to show what a wonderful man he could make out of him, but to reveal his Son in me. So the one aspect that it's talking about is if we have the courage to share the gospel, the world will, the Bible says the world will hate us. And that's something we have to be willing to face. The reality is in our world that there's, at some point, we may become second-class citizens. Some of our privileges may be taken away. We don't really know. So we have to be willing to be willing to put aside some of our conveniences if it comes to the point where it's either that or the gospel. The other aspect of it, now it's not necessarily what it's talking about here, but something I think is important when you share the gospel is that you're willing to get down on the level of those who are filthy. Something that I wouldn't say we experienced too much here, although in some of the large cities where they have really rich sections of the city and then the slums, I think if you would live in that area, you would see a lot more, what would you call it? Basically, people look down on other people like they're too dirty to associate with them. And it's something that I experienced a little bit more when I was in Haiti. As most of you know, basically everyone in Haiti speaks Haitian Creole as their main language or first language, but to give a little context there, Haitian Creole relates to French, basically the same way that Dutch and German are related. Creole is kind of a mashup of different things. It's not really an official language. And then French is an official language, and is what the government officials would use and is more the official language of the country. But something that interested me is that as missionaries there, we related to the people on a low level, so Haitian Creole was a language that we learned. But if you go up into the rich section of town, nobody wants to speak Haitian Creole to you because they're too good for that. And it puts you in some interesting situations, because if you were at a store or something that was a more upscale location, and you got in a situation where these people, you knew they could speak the language, but they didn't want it to speak it to you. They would speak Haitian Creole to their friends and as a casual thing at home, but they wouldn't talk it in public because they're too upscale. They don't want to lower themselves to that level to be seen. So that just made me think something that's really important when you're reaching out to people is that you view every single person with dignity, regardless of how they look or how bad they smell or what their house looks like. And sometimes I think it can be a bit of a barrier, depending on what lifestyle we live. Even if our attitude isn't that way, sometimes just our lifestyle can make a person feel like they can't relate to you because you live so differently. Yeah, it's just a challenge I want to leave with you, to maybe, I think the way I would describe it, I've particularly thinking about myself or watching myself, probably more in the time after I came back from Haiti than when I was there, just kind of reflecting on that, and also working with people in Elkhart. I think it's important that you watch yourself and you watch your own reactions to identify biases that you have. Sometimes you don't even think about the fact that you're reacting a certain way to a certain type of person until you catch yourself doing it. And it's important to think about that, because if you don't realize that you're doing it, you're not going to be able to fix it. And yeah, for some of us it takes an awful lot of work. Yeah, I don't want to take away from what he's going to share, but that's just a challenge I wanted to leave with you. Be willing to do whatever it takes to spread the gospel, even if it comes to the point where we're considered the filth of the world. And the second aspect of that is be willing to become the filth of the world, in a sense, or, as some people would say, get in the gutters, and give people that are there a sense of human dignity, which is really important to spreading the gospel and also to bringing them out of that. That's all I have to share. I'll turn over the time to Brandon.
Good evening. It's good to be here this evening. Thank you, Kendrick, for sharing with us there. I had to think of that. So we may not put ourselves in circumstances so often where we actually have people that are homeless in the street smelling bad, but sometimes there's people in our neighbors or in our churches that there's aspects of their life that I'm not getting anywhere, I'm not getting near that. That's a mess, you know. I think so. It's more often we find ourselves in that situation. It's easy to reach out to the people in church that seem to have everything together, but if somebody who's got something in their life that's a mess, it's easier to step back and say, I'm glad that's not my mess. You know, as brothers in Christ, and as we need to be there for each other, and our neighbors around us. I think all of us can think of a neighbor in our head that look at their life and say, boy, they sure messed their life up. I'm not doing that, you know. And so that's a challenge for me, because I had one neighbor that popped in my head when I thought of that. You know, and what are we doing there? Are we willing to get in a messy situation to show Christ to someone? Thank you for that challenge, Kendrick. I appreciate that. So it's a privilege to be here this evening. Me and Wade talked about this on the way to prison a couple years ago. So back in 2019, we traveled together to Michigan City to pass out Christmas cookies with Gospel Echoes, and that was just a little bit before I took a trip to Iraq. And Wade had mentioned then, hey, you should come share sometime. Then just a couple weeks ago he called, because I obviously didn't take the initiative to make the contact. So I appreciate Wade willing to reaching out and get in contact for this. So for this evening, I just want to give you a little bit of overview of what we're doing with Christian Mission Charities. I think many of you probably, or some of the older ones here, would remember Christian Mission Charities with Dave Bontrager as Jesus to the Iron Curtain. So I'll kind of go a little bit where we came from to where we're at today and what we're still doing today. So with that, I'll get started here. As Jesus to the Iron Curtain was what Dave Bontrager, which would have been the bishop at Fairhaven years back when I was born in a little tyke. Dave Bontrager was our bishop there. And throughout the 70s and the 80s, he did a lot of work in the Soviet Union, working with the Christians there, bringing Bibles in, going over there teaching, training pastors, and that sort of work. As far as I know, he never really had a mission established during that time. He was just kind of doing it on his own. And then in 85, he established Jesus to the Iron Curtain was officially established. I know it was going long before that, but that was when it was officially established. Then in 86, he joined up with Richard Wormbrunt and formed Christian Missions to the Communist World, with Dave Bontrager was still the president of that mission. Then he passed away in 89. Then Neil Beachy, he's my grandfather, would have been a pastor at Fairhaven as well, and had been working with the mission some, took over Dave's responsibilities there. And then in 91, Wormbrunt and Beachy split the mission, and that's when Voice of the Martyrs started with Richard Wormbrunt and Tom White. And they're in Oklahoma. I think many of you have probably heard of Voice of the Martyrs. It's a very large, multi-million-dollar mission. And I think that was kind of one of the reasons they split, from my understanding, was kind of the scale of what they were looking at trying to do. So anyway, this stuff all happened before I was involved, and by the time I was involved, my grandfather didn't remember very well, so I don't know a whole lot about the early days of the mission, and I guess that's not that important, but I know for some people here that's what you remember, so it's kind of to see how we got to where we are today. Then Neil Beachy retired in 2010, and at that point, Fairhaven Church just took over direction. Instead of having a director, we just have a board of directors now from the church there. There's Dave and Amy. Amy would have passed away, I think, in 2000, or so. It's been a while, but she lived quite a bit longer than Dave. And I just remember as a child, Dave was one of the more fiery evangelists, and I remember as a kid growing up, the only thing I really remember, he died in 89, I was born in 84, so it was pretty small yet, but a traumatic experience as a child. He collapsed when he was preaching one Sunday, and the paramedics came up the center aisle and took him out on a stretcher, and so that's my memory of Dave. I know you others probably have other memories than that, but that's what I remember of Dave. I don't really remember him anything with the mission as far as that goes. And this would have been probably in the late 80s. And this is about the last picture I took with my grandparents before he passed away. I think this was in 2012, I think. And this is our current board. Dennis Hostet were there in the front row on your right. They moved to Tennessee, so he's not on the board anymore, but the rest of us still are. And in the front center is George John, which is our director in India. This was when he was here for a visit in 2016, I think. All right, so a lot of what we do are things that were established. There's several things that Dave had established with contacts he had made over the years, and these children's homes in Pakistan and Romania is one of those things. Hans Hoster is I think he lives in Germany, and he would have made contact with Dave during those years working in Europe, and Dave helped him establish these children's homes and pledged CMC's support over the years. And since this has been going since in the 80s sometime, I'm not even exactly sure when. So we've continued to support these homes. The one pictured here is the one in Pakistan. And this is just the location of it, and I have a few pictures here. I have a lot of slides, so I'm going to go through these fairly quick. When I put this together, I haven't done it yet anywhere, so I don't know how long this is going to take, but the clock is straight up, so I should be good. So I'll just some of these pictures, I'll just kind of flip through, and you can just take a look at. There's not a whole lot to say about some of these. There's wrong one. There's Hans Hoster, the one from Europe, which he's retired now, and his son has taken over his position. but it's just been a good partnership. They don't have any fundraising or any connections in the United States except for through Christian Mission Charities. So that's kind of been Dave's thing, is helping, when he started these things, helping missions with fundraising here in the States that don't have anybody here. And that's one of the things he was kind of passionate about, is we got all this money over here and all these people, we can help people that don't run their missions. And I think he helped a number of people establish missions as well. I think most of you can read, so I don't necessarily have to read all these. Then the other children's home that's also run by Hoster out of Germany is in Romania. And one neat thing about this home is a lot of their church people from Germany, they send their children there for VS, kind of in the same way we would send them to Hillcrest or Mountain View or something like that. They can send their children to these children's homes as a place of service. And it does, a lot of these children, especially in Pakistan, the children in Pakistan would almost all come from Muslim families, and yet the government there still allows them to have a Christian children's home. So, and they go home. Most of them are half orphans. They have maybe one parent or grandparents that do care for them, but they can't really take care of them. So they send them there, and they go home for holidays and things. So it is a good way to get the word out, and it's been established for a long time, very well respected in the countries where they're at. And this is just a picture from this year of a baptism class they had there at the orphanage in Romania. I don't know who the people are, but it'll be coming from the birthplace of Anabaptism. It's good to see young women dressing modestly and having their heads covered, and so I think it's just a blessing to see fruit coming after all these years of support there, that there's still things going there. There's also a children's home in Bolivia that we support. One of our board members, Alan Miller, had traveled to Bolivia for another reason and came across this children's home that was struggling. At that point, it was run by the Southern California Bible Fellowship, which would be like a charity type group out of California. And when he was there, he pledged support for that. Now the people he was there with, that were there when he was there, his son and wife run it now a little more independently, and they're looking to become self-supporting. So we're hoping within the next 5 years, this children's home will be self-supporting, because they have like a beef cattle ranch there, and Phil and Joyce just live there as directors, and they also have house parents, and so we're hoping that this can become a self-supporting. That's something that we can, in time, step away from a little bit. But at this point, we are supporting them. Phil and Joyce were at our house this last summer. They were up in the States for like a tour through to visit different supporters, and we spoke to them for a while there. And that's kind of our goal there, is to, I guess that's our goal in all overseas missions, is that they can raise their own support, and then we can go on somewhere else. But that doesn't always work, and that's why we're willing to support wherever we're needed. They have a little farm there, and they have a Facebook page that posts, that's where some of these pictures came from. Looks like the children have a lot of fun there and learn some good things. So. And then this is still kind of our connection to the Soviet Union, the work Dave was doing there. After Dave came back, or some of the people he met in the Soviet Union came over to Canada, and they started a mission called Voice of Hope, which their goal was to support pastors. This was after the Iron Curtain came down in the former Soviet Union. And so Dave obviously became involved in that as well. And so we've still continued to do that since the 90s, work with Voice of Hope. They're based out of Canada, supporting, there's currently 2 pastors that CMC supports. Pastor Pavel here is in Kazakhstan. And then Pastor Roman and his wife are in northern Russia. He's the one, that first picture that was up with the Northern Lights, he sent that up there. I'm not sure if he took it, but it was one of the areas, one of their trips is where that picture was taken. I thought that was a pretty neat picture. I was going to put it in the newsletter, but that's black and white, so that didn't work very good, so I said this is a good place to use it. They do a lot. He does several trips a year up into the far north of Russia to the nomadic tribes. And his letters, when they come back, are very interesting reads. I I think just this last year I had a two-part in one of the newsletters of two different, of one of his trips up there. Yeah, so they have everything from the mud there to snow, and the last trip they had, it was very, very cold. And those, like the ones here in the back, was a group of youth. It'd be like her, and then those were a group of youth that went along with Roman, which is here, on a trip, like a VS type trip. I think it's like a 6-week trip into these nomadic tribes, which might get a missionary, pretty much get a missionary every couple of years, maybe, whenever Roman can get up there. And so it's a pretty neat, the things they go through there. And just the one thing I had to think of when I saw this picture, they said when they, in these teepees, when it's 40 below zero, at night, everybody would lay down, and then the master, the owner of the home, whatever, has heavy reindeer felt and would lay them over the top of everybody, and you couldn't get up until morning when he uncovered everybody. That would, if you're claustrophobic, that might not be the ideal trip. And these, they had however many people there were. I think they had 8 people in these vehicles, and they would just ride for hours and hours, and had stories how the wheels fell off because the bolts got so cold and brittle, and the metal got brittle, and changing tires in the snow. And yeah, it's interesting the trips they go through there. And the idea is to bring the gospel to these tribes, and they're not even always sure where they're going to find them, because they do move. They're reindeer herders, still some of them, or they hunt seals. They're still, it's a life that I can't imagine anyway. Anyway, so now I'll talk a little bit about India, which is kind of our biggest mission. Christian Ministries India is the CMC branch of, is the Indian branch of CMC. It's established in India as Christian Ministries India. David, I got a little bit of history on this, might as well not get ahead of myself here. It was founded in '88 with Dave Bontrager, helped Pastor George John here found it. And you can see a little bit about George's history here. He spent time in prison for, I talked to him about that. He said, well, he was in United Arab Emirates, and he felt a need to share the gospel, so he got a phone book and just started mailing gospel tracts to every address. Just started in the A's and started going down the list, and eventually he got caught for that, and was put in prison. And then through that is where he met Richard Wurmbrand, who had been in prison in the Soviet Union, and that's kind of how the connection was made between George and Richard Wurmbrand to Dave. It's how the connection was made through George's time spent in prison. And I did bring one of his books along here that I'll leave it here for you guys. I don't know if you have a library or somewhere. I'll leave it here. You can do with it what you want. So if somebody wants to read his story through this was written back in '94, I think, so it's not up to current, but it shares about his time in prison and such. And I've encouraged him to write from then on and get it published again to be a little bit bigger book. But this is an interesting read about George's time in prison there. And as I say, Dave helped him form Christian Ministries India as the branch here of CMC. And then my grandfather would have visited with Richard Wurmbrand in 1990, which I think is kind of the time they decided to split. Richard Wurmbrand was very much a presenter. They would have these huge meetings where they'd put billboards up and have thousands of people gather in huge stadiums and have evangelistic meetings. And my grandfather was not didn't think that was necessarily the way to go, and that was what Richard was really in his element, I guess. So I think that was, from my understanding, that was a little bit the differences that led to the split at that point. So again, God works in the ways that he works, so I wasn't there, and it's neither here nor there, but I think that's kind of what happened there. I visited India in 2012, which is where most of these pictures come from. It's high time to get back there again, but you know, with COVID now the last couple of years and having a baby about every year or two, it just seems like it's never the right time. So I have a quota of trips I can take every year, and I think I've been saving up now the last 2 years. So once this COVID thing breaks, then hopefully I can get back to a few of these places. George, in the last 6 months, had COVID pretty bad and almost lost his life, but by the grace of God, he's doing well again. And his son is also helping with the mission and in a position to take over then if something would happen to George. I think George is being his upper 70s probably by now. George's office is there where the arrow is there in southern India. That's the most free part of India. India, if you look at United States as a Christian nation, then you see California the way they are. If you look at India as a Hindu nation, then southern India is kind of like their California. There's a lot more freedom there. There's not nearly as strong of a Hindu presence, which allows most missions in India have a base kind of in southern India in the Kerala state, because that's where there's the most freedom. I don't even think half the people in the state of Kerala there are Hindu, which is, in most parts of the country, it's 95% or more are Hindu. There's Muslims and Catholics, and we'll see a little bit of that later. Then here's, I see you guys do have a crumb box back here. I'm assuming that those go over to CMC as well, and we've sent a lot of books over in the years, and they've started a library there at their offices where pastors can come and borrow books, and they even have college students that are learning English come to because they just want English books to read. So it's a good opportunity to give English books to people that are just looking to learn English. And I'll say I got a little bit about the literature at the end then too, that I'll share a little what we're doing with that right now. And each of the churches there has its own cabinet that, the churches, there's 7 churches spread out there around in the area in the state of Kerala there, in the area around where we were at that I visited while we were there. And since the time I was there, each church got a cabinet with books and things for their own little village or community. Then here's just some pictures of the different churches that we visited while I was there and some of the pastors. Excuse me. This is the main church here that George is the lead pastor of. It's right close to their offices, their main church. This was the Sunday morning service that I was there. There in the front center that's George's son, Abraham. And that guy right there was our driver for most of the time we went. India is one of those places you don't just go over there and drive around. You kind of need to be a bad enough driver that you can fit in, that realize which signs mean something, which ones don't, which lights matter, and the horn is more important than the brakes. And those have been to other countries, I think it's this is the only place that you could go somewhere without, like the United States, I think is one of the few places you can go somewhere without a horn and be fine. In India, you're probably better without brakes. Here is just sharing, and another thing that just stuck out to me, looking at the church services here, the ladies, they all have their shawls that they wear over their shoulders during the day, but during church they all cover their heads. That's not an Anabaptist tradition for them. It's what the Bible teaches. And that was a blessing for me, because we so often hear it's just a tradition. It's just a tradition. We don't need that. It's just a tradition. That's the only reason we do it. Well, it's not a tradition to them. It's just that's what the Bible teaches. They don't wear it over their heads all the time, but if they pray, they put it over their heads, and if they're in church, they put it over their heads. So I thought that was kind of neat. And I noticed there's a lot. This church had a lot, and all the churches we visited had more women than men. It's kind of a sad. There's a lot of men that don't go with their women to church. They send their wives, or their wives just choose to go to church, and the men are not okay with that. So, and again, it's one of those things that there's a thing of submission, and there's a thing of taking the wrong path. And again, I'm not in a position to judge on what should be done there, but it is the reality in a lot of other countries. Then every Sunday after church they serve a meal that has a whole lot more people than the church service did. The community people, it's outside there underneath the pavilion. The community people come over for a meal, and it's just a kind of a good outreach. I don't know if that'll work here. If we just say every Sunday after church we got a community meal, anybody who wants to come, well, I don't know. Maybe we should. I don't know if that'll work or not, but it does work there, that's for sure. And just a few of the pictures, more of the churches we visited there. The year that it says after the church is the year that church was established. And this was a meeting where every month they have a meeting, all the pastors of the churches come together, and whoever wants to from the churches can come, but it's like a pastors type meeting. So yeah, so I got to share with all the Indian pastors here, which is a little intimidating because you don't even know how he's translating it, if what you're saying it makes any sense, but you kind of hope that you get your point across a little bit, and don't look too foolish. This is the pastor of the church where the meeting was at. And then afterwards we had a fellowship meal there, and I'm not sure, there was a couple ladies there that fixed the food, and the pastors went around and everybody sat down, and the pastors brought the bowls around and served everybody as just a sign of servant leadership. And there's one benefit of the way this was done, because this was a cleanup then afterwards. They threw their banana leaves out and the birds cleaned them off. But like for us, then they had to set, since we were visitors, they did set a table up, and we got to sat at a table, and they actually brought us like paper placemats to use instead of leaves. But this is generally what they can use for plates. And pretty much every single meal you get is rice with some kind of sauce with meat in it, and sometimes you can eat it, and sometimes it's so spicy you just got to eat plain rice. And this was all the pastors that were there currently. There's been a few changes since then of pastors that are no longer with him, that other pastors have replaced them. But this was, when I was there, this was the pastors of the 7 churches were all there for this picture, with George and his wife over here on the end. Then this is just a few pictures of the churches. I'll just kind of go through these fairly quickly. Since then, they have put a church building up here, but I just couldn't find a picture of it. I know I have one somewhere, but I couldn't find it when I was looking. And I went, they still had some decorations up from their New Year's parties. That's why there's some of these churches have banners and stuff hanging. And the way they generally set up, each church has a full-time pastor with a parsonage there, and the pastor lives right by the church. And that's his job, is to just minister to the church and the community and the town that they're in. And then another neat thing, the way they're doing, most of these churches here support their own pastors. Our money generally does not go to support the pastors here in southern India, because most of the churches they're taught to tithe, and the church supports their own pastor. And like in the main church and a few of the others, they can actually use money to reach other parts in India, the money they raise there, because it's a more well-to-do part of India. At the most, CMC was giving any of these pastors was $35 a month, and the church was paying for the rest of their living expenses. Like Pastor George, his salary is $300 a month to run the mission over there. And I know he ends up giving a bunch of that away yet too, if somebody comes up and asks for it. This lady here is, I think it's the grandmother of the pastor's wife. She was 100 at the time I was there, and had been a Christian since she was 18. And she wanted to pray for the mission and pray for me while we were there. So George said she did a good job. I don't know what she said, but George said she prayed a good blessing on the mission and upon me and my family as well. So, and the last time George was here, which would have been 2016, she was still living. So I don't know if she still is or not. I haven't asked him recently, but I doubt it, because she's standing up as tall as she gets there, and I'm down on a knee. There's the churches here. It's not really a denomination. They consider themselves a non-denominational church, but they are CMI, Christian Ministries India churches. Most of the churches have 20 or 30 people there. And once George introduced me there, like in this place, the lady was like, or the mother of the pastor's wife, like, pointed out this wall there. We need that plastered there. We need money to plaster. I said, you just need to talk to George. And this was, when I was there, they were renting a building here, is where they had this church. Then since then, they built a building on that foundation there. This pastor here, he You can't. I don't think I have a better picture. No, I don't have a better picture of him. He's an older man, just a small guy, and what he did for a living was a coconut getter. Like he'd climb the trees and get the coconuts down. That's what he did for a living. Or I don't know if he did it for a living, but that's what he did in their town. People wanted their coconuts, and then several years ago he fell out of a tree and died. I think he was in his 70s already, but his whole life been climbing coconut trees. And this is one of George's main assistants there that helps him with the church planning, and he doesn't pastor a church. He's more involved with the administrating of the mission. And then there's also numerous churches in further north India that we didn't get to go visit because of India's big and travel's hard. So you can see the different places here where there's outreach stations, and each station has several churches there. This is where they're based out of, kind of. Again, I've never visited these. That's what I kind of like to do. At least next time I go somewhere in North India, visit at least one of these areas. But it's to get from southern India to north to even to up in here into here. Like we were down here in this town right at the southern tip. Even to get up into here is like a 40-hour train ride. And those Indian trains don't look like you'd want to be on one of those for 40 hours. So then up in here, you pretty well have to fly from southern India to get up to any of these. Like the biggest town in India here I think is Mumbai, or Bombay, two different names. Then it does border China up north, and Pakistan, and Myanmar over here in Bangladesh. So there's a lot of influences from other countries coming into northern India as well. Then here's some pictures George had sent out. These I did not take these of different areas, some of the worship services, and just looking at the way that people dress and colors, you can see there's quite a bit of difference from the churches that I went to the ones that are in these more mountainous regions. And just a little bit about, I'm going to go through these pretty quick because I see time is going quicker than I am. Just a little bit about most of India is Hindus, and on the Hindus have over 30 million gods. And each one of their gods has a temple somewhere in the world, and some are very, very small, but there's so many temples. Every street corner there's another temple of something. I mean, there's just walking down the street, you see dozens of them just in one little street in one town. So I believe it's somewhere that there's that many temples if all the towns are like this. And some of them don't even have like anything on the outside that you can tell. And there was a couple beautiful, elaborate Muslim mosques down close to the ocean there that we went by. And then also some very elaborate Catholic cathedrals. So there's a lot of influences that are reaching in there. And while we were there, they were getting ready for an election, and you saw all the Communist Party signs there. So the Communist Party is working very hard to make inroads there, which the Communist Party and the Hindu Party are the two main political parties. There's two different Hindu parties in the Communist Party. And the Communists don't like the Hindus don't like the Communists because the Communists are atheists pretty well. So that's kind of the political battle there in southern India is between the Communists and the Hindus. And I think George said it's almost better when the Communists are in charge because they're all concentrated on being ornery to the Hindus and don't really worry about the Christians too much. And then we're also working, kind of aside from the churches down there, we're working with the Bible Project, which is working on getting native language Bibles into northern India. Many, as you can see in the bottom there, many people have never seen a Bible in their native languages. So we're working on shipping Bibles up to parts of northern India. And there's a current picture of George there you can see his, after COVID there, his hair went, I think he may have been dyeing his hair, he didn't tell me, but all of a sudden his hair went completely white. But anyway, this is just from several weeks ago, I think, or maybe a month or two ago. So he's back up and going again. They send many Bibles out to evangelists in different areas, and the evangelists go door to door to distribute Bibles and through that can plant some churches as well. Once they have converts in a town, they work on planting churches. Um, and also, I should have updated that. There's been several other languages besides Hindi that we have expanded to now as well. And here's just several more of the evangelists that are distributing Bibles. And this was at a Bible school where they passed out Bibles to the young people. And these are 3 more of the evangelists that are working in northern India. So India is kind of where I kind of have a passion for getting the Word of God out in India, through the churches there in the southern part and through the Bible Project, just getting the Word and the Word of God in the hands of people. And every month we send a separate support to the Hindi Bible Project. So if you as a church or individuals want to simply support getting Bibles out into India, we do that separately than we do the support just for, if you if somebody gives money specifically for Bibles, it goes directly that next month. It goes directly to India if we can to supply Bibles. So just an opportunity if somebody's interested in doing that. And George has spent his early years with him and his wife would go on the motorcycle and had one of those mega horns. They'd go park in the corner of a street, and he'd get his megaphone out and he would preach and she would sing, and that's what he did. But he said now that he's old, he can't do that anymore. So now before he dies, he wants to distribute 1 million Bibles. So I don't know where he's at on that for sure yet, but that was when he said when he first started this several years ago. But I know we've sent a lot of Bibles out through India. But 1 billion people is a lot of people. There's just it's hard to wrap your head around 1,000 million people. Okay, now a while back, we worked with Plain Compassion in Iraq, and I think Josh and Josiah here are both very familiar with that. They've both been over there. Right when they were first starting this project, Plain Compassion was just very new yet, one of their first projects. I guess most of you are familiar with Plain Compassion to a certain extent. It's a mission out of Pennsylvania. They're actually having a program at Berea, and they stopped by our house, and I talked to them for a while, and we talked with the board, decided to support their project in Iraq for the duration of that. And to start out with, it was called the Houses of Hope. Here's just a little bit about PCCR, which was their project was fixing up damaged homes after ISIS had left a town and make them livable so people can get back into town. They started in Sinjar. It was the town they started in initially, and they were there for 2 years before the team members were all detained and jailed overnight, and they had to leave the town. And then they moved to the town of Bashika, Iraq, which the first time I went down, I was going to go to Sinjar initially, then Josh, were you in Sinjar? Okay. You were in Bashika too? I couldn't remember. But we were going to go to Sinjar, and then everybody got detained and locked up for a couple days. That the mission didn't even know where they were, and I'm told never to come back there again. But then so our trip was canceled, then postponed to a later date, and then we ended up going to Bashika soon after they were established there. And this is a little bit about the town during the time that I was there. ISIS took the town over in 14. It was liberated in November of 16. So a little over 2 years, ISIS was in the town, and most of the houses were standing, but most of them were damaged. So we would go into the house, and the project we were doing there was putting glass into windows. During the time I was there, there was different projects that went on throughout the project in Iraq. When I was there, we were putting glass in windows. So that's what we did pretty much every day. I think you know who that guy is. I went through it when I was going through my picture. I wanted to make sure I had to keep a couple of in here, Josiah, and for me it was a good time. It was a good project they had going there. Have opportunity for young people to go into an area like that and work, and just to see the response of people as they, why are you doing this? Why? Like, who's paying you? Like, nobody's paying us. They just could not wrap their heads around that. Why someone want to come fix their windows without ever getting, for just because you wanted to. And it really struck me, a month after we left, ISIS could have taken the town over and broke every window again, but the impact made on people is still there, regardless if that window gets broken again. So that was kind of a neat project there, and I was kind of sad when that ended. And I think the Iraqis kind of took advantage of us a little bit a few times. They would see these Americans and they'd wave us down, hey, this semi needs to be unloaded of cement bags, and then they'd all stand around and watch the dumb Americans come do their work for them that they were getting paid to do. We did that and then here we were loading this truck full of cement blocks. But again, it was just one of those opportunities. Our window in those people's lives was just a tiny little window we had each one of those people. And I bet there's some of these guys standing around still remember the day those dumb Americans did their work for them, and they weren't even getting paid. So anyway, this was house. I just remember we got there. There was tarps over every single window. Then we left, and 2 hours later, and there was glass and all. Just kind of bringing the light into somebody's life. I thought that was kind of a neat thing of what we were doing there. Anyway, I think that's Josiah. Isn't that you? I thought so. I thought, now those, I hope my boys never do that. So I had to leave that picture in there just for Josiah's sake. They did make it up there all the way. So anyway, and then after there's some political conflict and PCCR could no longer go into Bashika, they got kicked out of there because Iraq took over from the Kurdish, and it was kind of a mess. So then that ended up working in a refugee camps from Yazidis refugees from Sinjar. And my second trip to Iraq, which would have been in 2020, is when we were still working in this camp here in the Dahuk, Iraq area. You can see there was about 8,700 people in this camp, and 3,100 were ages 5 to 17. So that's a lot of young children there. With not a whole lot to do, so they had a community center and just had people go into the camp to just organize soccer games and just things like that. There was a community center. We're standing in front of it there, and there's a picture down here where they teach English classes, computer classes, and things like that. They had volunteers come down to do that, volunteer teachers. And then we were also working on the border between Syria and Iraq. This was the time that there was a lot of fighting in Syria. There was people coming into Iraq from Syria. So we were set up at the border with shoes and coats and baby formula and diapers, and the border people would drive back and forth and gather people up every night that crossed the border and bring them to this center to figure out what to do with them, which camp to send them to. Then during that time, we were able to give them some of their necessities at the crossing there. And then that ended in mid-2020 after the COVID thing started and moving became hard, and many of the people were able to go back to Sinjar, so that project kind of ended, and we're currently not supporting Plain Compassion any projects right now. But I put this in there because for, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 years there, we did support this project in Iraq, and I know some of you know a little about that, so that's why I left this in there, something we have done in the past. And this is our newest mission that we just started last summer. Tanikin Frost, which is right here on the end, she lives over here in Goshen, and she also wrote a book, and I have that here, and I'll leave that here as well. She's a single lady that grew up in a Bruderhof colony, which would be similar to Hutterites in Paraguay, South America, and ended up coming up here, and she started a ministry and went to Israel and ended up starting a children's home in Mozambique, working with the poor. At that time she started, it was the poorest place in the world, and it's still pretty well the poorest place in the world. So she started this children's home, and initially had been living over there about 9 months a year. She's not actually running it the day-to-day. There's a church there that she partnered with a church there in Mozambique that runs this home. So it's all native run. She's the only really American that's involved. But she's getting older, and her health is not as good as it used to be, and she's been staying up here longer, and they were struggling for funds to the point where sometimes they'd only get one meal a day, and she shared with us the struggles they had. So we thought that this is something that we can help with as well. It's just a blessing to have churches support us, and I hope we can continue to be a charity that can be supported and trusted to use the funds in a way that glorifies God. And I think this is something that is important. All these there's several different villages that have a home in it, but the one neat thing I've noticed that they've done, that they've made intentional to do, is all the caretakers of the children, pretty well all of them, are widows. There's so many widows there whose husbands have been killed or died of sickness, and they bring these widows in to take care of these children who don't have parents. So to me, it's a blessing to see how that works. And they're tied in with the church there. There's Pastor Rigo. He may be, I'm not sure if he's on this picture or not. Oh, he's right there. Him and his wife there are the ones that pretty much run it. And there's a good number of churches there that he's in charge of. And the churches all support this and work together to take care of these children and get them to school and take care of the widows. And what we do is we support orphan care through this. Pretty much the money that CMC sends over is designated for orphan care. It's designated for food, clothing, the things that the orphans need. And I don't think there's barely any overhead over there, under my understanding. They have to hire some people for things, but there's really not. It's something I can relate with. There's not a big organization that's making money off of this. It's going. Tannikin's got a heart for these orphans, and that's what it's going for. And they also, as the orphans grow older, try to teach trades. This one in the front here is learning how to sew, so he can sew for the children. And here's one that's teaching children in school. And it's just a neat program, the way they have that set up. And we did buy them right after we started. We bought a corn mill. They said that was a big need they had. They always had to go to the next village, to the corn mill, to get their corn ground for their cornbread or whatever they did with their corn. And I think that corn mill was like $6,000. Oh, no, that also included the building to put it in. And it just seems like, well, why don't you just buy one? There's so many, but if you don't even have enough money to supply your meals every day, things like this can kind of take a back seat. So it was a blessing to be able to get that to something they've wanted for a long time and had a need for, and that now they can actually grind for other people in their village and generate a little bit of income, and plus train people how to operate it. And they're also working on a carpentry shop, kind of the same way, to make their own beds and furniture and that type of thing, and also teach people how to trade. Okay, now one of the last things I have here is on the used literature. And that's something you guys are directly involved in. A lot of churches in the area are sending literature. We have a building out behind Fairhaven Church there, a storage shed where we store our literature until we ship it. And if anybody has any Bibles, books, anything like that, you're welcome to drop those off at any time there. It's never locked, or not supposed to be. And then, like this top picture here, we have sent a lot to India over the years. But the last time we sent over there, I think it kind of overwhelmed them a little bit. There was so much stuff. They had to hire a truck, and then we had a box that probably weighed 3,000 pounds made out of OSB and pallets, and they weren't really designed to. They had to take it apart and unload everything piece by piece. So for the last several years now, we've sent through an organization called Love Packages, which is in Butler, Illinois. That's what they do. Their whole organization is sending new and used literature overseas to English-speaking places. I think last year they sent 110 shipping containers overseas. So what we've done is just, at this point, until George specifically requests more, we're sending through Love Packages. And you guys could send it directly there, but I think at this point we're gathering up, and about once or twice a year we take a trailer load out there. That's a pretty. Last year we took the high school children from Hebron School out with the van and a trailer and had a work day out there, and it's just pretty neat the amount of literature they're able to. I mean, 110 shipping containers, that's 2 a week. I mean, that's a lot of literature, and then plus their warehouse is still full. So that's what we're doing with the used literature right now, and it's a blessing to them, and for us it's a way to keep involved with the churches, and it's a way to that anybody can help with that in a small way, and it is important. So that's my summary, I guess, and I'm just barely over time. So just want to thank you for over the years. I know you guys have been involved with this for a long time, longer than I have. Some of you have at least been a part of supporting this, and I really do appreciate that. we couldn't continue to support the things that we do and the work that's being done without money, obviously. That's our board here. Nobody, one of the board members does the book work. I do the newsletters. I mean, nobody gets paid anything, so any funds we get do get sent overseas. So we just want to be like the song says, a channels only. You know, we want to be a channel that can be used by the Lord for us and that have way more than what we need to be able to reach those that don't have quite as much. Everybody can be a part of that. So just in closing here, I have a story that I wrote that I like to read that hopefully can be an encouragement to us. It's an illustration I heard, and I kind of put it in a story form that I'd just like to share with you. So I'll just do that at this point. It won't take very long. I know I'm just a few minutes over, but long ago in a faraway desert land lived a rich, kind man. He lived in a beautiful palace and was known through all the land. He had the most beautiful garden that anyone had ever seen. In a land surrounded by a vast desert, people came from far and wide to experience this beautiful garden. In his garden were hundreds of different flowers that would bloom throughout the year and trees of every kind. In the garden were also many wonderful herbs and plants that could be used to heal ailments of every kind. In his garden were also the most nourishing and tasty fruits and vegetables that were grown anywhere in the world. As you can tell, people came to his garden to be nourished, healed, and find rest. However, to reap all the benefits of this wonderful garden, the seekers first needed to come to the palace and ask if they could go to the garden. The kind man never said no. Then each of the people was required to walk down a very long path to the garden. Each and every person who completed the trek down this path always found the healing and fulfillment they were seeking. To keep this garden beautiful, it also required large amounts of water to be carried from a spring by a palace down the path where the garden was located. The wise master hired many servants whose job it was to carry water each day from the spring down the long path to the garden. Each servant had a yoke that fit upon their shoulders with a hook on each end so they could carry 2 buckets of water at a time. Each of the servants would fill their buckets in the morning, make the long trek to the garden, and water the portion of the garden that was assigned to them. They would do this day after day, week after week, and year after year. And the servants loved working for their kind, caring master and had much pride and enjoyment in knowing that their labors helped maintain the beautiful garden that could bring so much nourishment, peace, and joy to so many people. One of these servants was Malachi. Each day Malachi would fill his buckets along with the others and start down the long path to the garden. And each day when he reached the garden, the buckets on his yoke were empty. While the others went to water their sections, they sometimes looked scornfully at Malachi and reminded him that he was of no value to the garden. You see, the buckets that were carried by Malachi each had a hole in it. Try as he might, he could never patch these holes. Many times in despair, he would cry to the master for buckets like the others so he could help with the garden. The master lovingly encouraged him to continue working, and yet still the buckets leaked. Year after year, Malachi carried these same buckets down the path, feeling as if his whole life were a waste. No matter how he hurried or how fast he went, he was never fast enough to bring the water to the garden to help it to be beautiful. The only factor that kept Malachi working day after day was the commitment and promise he had made to serve the master. The other servants all looked down on poor Malachi and his leaky buckets. His service to the master was the only thing that gave him the strength and motivation to pick up his buckets every day. The years went by and Malachi became an old man. The master stopped him one morning and took him into the palace. He put his arms around Malachi's powerful, stooped shoulders and told him, "Well done." The master said, "For all these years you have toiled for me. You have committed your life to my service. Now the time has come for you to be rewarded for your labors. You will spend the rest of your days with me here in the palace. No more labor, no more pain, just enjoyment and luxury for all your days." Malachi fell at the master's feet weeping and cried, "I'm not worthy of a reward. All these years I have worked and never, not even once, have I been able to bring the water to the garden. My life has been a waste and a failure. I could not do what the other servants did. I'm so sorry to let you down." The master gently helped Malachi to his feet and wiped the tears from his eyes and said, "My beloved friend, come with me." He led Malachi up many stairs till they were standing at the pinnacle of the highest tower in the palace. Malachi slowly gazed about the endless desert, and far in the distance he could see the beautiful garden. As he looked at the garden, his eyes followed the path that he had trod for so many days. As he looked at the path, what he saw amazed him. For the entire length of the path, both sides were filled with flowers as beautiful as any in the garden. It was a ribbon of beauty through the vast desert. All these years of walking the path, Malachi had never noticed what was growing up on each side of him. Malachi looked at the master and exclaimed, "How can this be? There was no one assigned to water alongside the path." The master said, "Only my most faithful servant was trusted to water the path. Each day as you carried those buckets, the holes that you despise are what made the path beautiful. Because of your faithful service, the path is beautiful for anyone who wants to walk it. The beautiful path serves as a guide and a motivation for those to reach the garden. You may have thought your life to be a failure, but each day I depended on you to water the path. You didn't understand why I didn't patch your buckets, but now you see those holes served a purpose. You obeyed your master and faithfully fulfilled your calling. You, above all others, have earned your reward. To me, this just really struck me as we can find ourselves in times in life we don't know what we're doing. We're just kind of going along, and I think we're where we think God wants us to be, but we're not doing anything, you know. We're just kind of, this person's watering this fruit tree, and this person's doing that, and I'm here, my buckets are empty, you know. Just to me, this is just a reminder that, like Paul says in Ephesians, whatever state we're in, there was to be content, you know. He said he was abased, he was humiliated, and he was okay with that, and you know, and he was everything was good, and he was okay with that, you know. And so hopefully this can be a reminder to all of us that you can get a little more out of this than just learn about CMC. Hopefully it can be a little bit of an encouragement to you. And as we see others around us, and it may seem that they're not doing what we're doing, well, maybe they're watering the path. Let's each just stay true to our calling where God has us. And we're all working together for the kingdom. That's what it's about. We're not all doing the same thing. God's given everybody different gifts and put everyone in different positions. And, you know, as long as we're all keep our focus on the commitment that we made to the Lord, what we're doing is going to be a benefit to the kingdom. So with that, I'd like to just open it up for any questions or comments, just a few minutes here, then I'll close with prayer. If you don't have any, you can talk to me a little bit afterwards too. This is another picture that was sent from Pastor on that trip in northern Russia. So is there anybody who has any comments I want to share now or questions?
Thank you, Brandon, for just sharing and opening up my understanding of the mission, of your mission. I've always read the newsletters, but I've never quite been able to piece things together.
Yeah. Well,
It's very enlightening.
it's one of those things. It's a little confusing to some, the way it's set up, because we're helping. We don't send any of our people out on the mission field. We're helping different missions in different countries, and I know that some people may think that's a silly thing to do, but I think that's kind of the way David had set that up, and I kind of within the vision of the mission is initially started to help persecuting Christians, and I think we're doing that in some areas, and also help orphans and supply Bibles, and those are the things that were on the back of the newsletter. It says the vision of the mission. I can't even quote them all right now, but those are all things that are on there. And I trust that we're doing the Lord's work in that. And so the mission's roughly $100,000 a year mission. It's about what we get in, about what so we just pretty much stay with what the money we get in. We use what we're given and kind of scale it that way. So there's always opportunities that come up, and any of these mission fields that we're in could use more funds, and that's the reality of it. But our goal is not to create sufficiency upon just take this and just live off this. That's not our goal at all. Our goal is to strengthen the hand of native missions, I guess, especially in India. That's our goal there, is to have these churches that we're planning to not depend upon us to send them money just to keep going. So I hope it kind of makes sense in what we're doing as a mission, and I realize there's so many different places you guys can help and support, and I give a lot of other places besides CMC as well. So, but I do appreciate your guys' way to inviting me to come and share, and yeah, it's just good to be here this evening and meet some of you and share what we're doing. So with that, why don't we just stand up and I'll close with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for this Lord's Day you've given us, that we could come together this morning in our congregations, come together again this evening, Lord, and look at some pictures of what you're doing around the world, and that I was able to share this evening as well. And just thank you for each one for their time and attention, where there's so many other places they could have been this evening. Their mind could have been so many other places. Just thank you for each one that's here this evening and just sharing their time with me as well. Just be with the congregation here at Clay Street, that they could be a light for your kingdom here in the community of Bourbon. Just ask that you would be with each one here as we travel home again, that your safety would be with us. And just, Lord, just want to ask that you would just join your church together as a brotherhood, that we can work together to further your kingdom starting in our homes, spreading to our communities, and going everywhere around the world, Lord. Be with us as fathers, that we can instill a devotion for you into our children, Lord, which is where that outreach starts. Be with the mothers as they train and nurture as well, and the grandparents and aunts and uncles, that we can work, that we can as a family and as a church just bring this next generation into the work for your kingdom. Just thank you so much for this evening, and ask your blessing as we depart. We just pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.